Session Blood.
Hello everyone and welcome to Session Blood episode 12. So we've reached a dozen. It's kind of cool. And
Woo!
yeah, I'm here with my co-host as always, Karol. And what a weekend of fab we've just had. Sort of slightly unconventional road to nationals because of the the COVID restrictions, but big shout out to Matt Rogers at Card Merchant for finding a way to actually run the event. I thought that was really cool, the way he did it. And
Yeah, and I think it's, I might just quickly add that, what happened was we basically had a limitation of 10 people being able to participate in the event. So what Matt did was he organized 8 separate mini events in which 10 people could play, and the top person after 3 or 4 rounds would qualify for the top 8, and then the top 8 playoff was done separately.
yeah, and I actually thought it was a really cool format. It's like the qualifiers were sort of those last chance qualifier fields where you win or go home kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was really cool. So I suppose, as always, we love our shout-outs. I've done one to Matt already, and I feel like you might have a couple you'd like to do.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to my girlfriend Chi Chi, who's been, always had my back, even though I play a lot of Fab, especially in a time where, she's almost due, so we're gonna have a baby very shortly, and that's the reason why I'm not going to nationals. But I just wanted to give a shout out also to all the partners in Flesh and Blood, because as the partners may know, I think for a lot of us, Flesh and Blood is more than a hobby, it's more of a passion, and it can take over a lot of aspects of our life. So thank you to all the partners for, being understanding, letting us go to tournaments and all that.
Yeah, being very supportive, and yeah, no, I think that's a really cool one actually, because there's probably a lot of people out there who that kind of resonates with. Yeah, when you said Flesh and Blood's more than a hobby, it reminds me of a quote from a football club manager one time who said, "Football, it isn't a matter of life or death. It's much more important than that." And it's kind of what Fab feels like sometimes.
It does.
But yeah, that's awesome, man. And big shout out to Chi Chi. Can't wait. Very exciting time, and can't wait to congratulate you once the baby comes.
Yeah, I can't wait. But yeah, another shout out is to my man Tom Penny. We had him on the show last week, and it was just great to get into the finals. After doing basically running through the metagame, talking about the warrior matchups and all that, we versed each other in the finals. So that was amazing.
Yeah, I think it's always like I've always thought it'd be really cool to play one of your best mates in the final. So guarantee one of you wins, and yeah, pretty
Exactly. I felt like, just going into that final, I felt like I won already.
yeah, playing with house money, and yeah, pretty timely to have him on the show, sort of running through his ideas on the format last week. I actually thought his deck list was really cool. I suppose it's public information, so we can talk about it without giving away tech. But yeah, I really like the whole sort of classic Tom Penny sidestep warrior plan with those guaranteed go again cards leading into things like Command and Conquer and Lightning Strike, energy potions. I know testing a few games against him, he just seemed to have like a really solid lock on how he plays the deck, knows his matchups really well, and makes very few mistakes. And I guess everyone makes the occasional mistake, but yeah, big shout out to Tom.
Yeah.
Now, I guess one sort of big thing that's come up recently, I know that Brute back in the old Welcome to Wrath days was a bit of a laughing stock, and then it was a bit better in Arcane Rising. But I think a lot of people are really interested to hear your thoughts on the Brute matchup, being, I would say, one of the best Brute players in New Zealand, and certainly a very successful one. So I thought...
Yeah, after making the finals yesterday, I've just been getting swarmed with all these questions about people trying to figure out the class. So yeah, I thought it'd be a good time to just kind of go over some of the things, maybe my list as well.
Yes.
A lot of people are asking me about my blue pitch cards, especially I don't even know the name of the cards myself. Awakening Bellow? What was it?
Yeah, the Awakening Bellow, that's the one that the
Yeah, the
one
Awakening
cost
Bellow.
that
Yeah, and
intimidates.
that and Swing Fist Think Later in blue. And to be honest, the reason why I have those two in blue is because I need blue pitch cards anyway. Those are you could call them filler cards, but at the same time they do serve a purpose. Swing First Think Later can make a really nice end game swing with a three card hand, and so basically with a blue pitch, you can swing first for two, you intimidate a card. So you basically, if it's kind of like both players are on like 4 or 5 life when life really matters, they're basically forced to use a card to block that swing first, and then you get an attack for 5 with the Romping Club, which is another annoying block. So it's a 3 card hand that tends to strip 3 cards with an Intimidate in there, which can, throw a spanner in the works for your opponent. So it's a bit of a finishing card. To be honest, I still haven't used it, but it's there. It's an option. And with the Awakening Bellows, it's just ever since I started running a lot more brute attacks with Crucible, the extra Intimidate and the extra +1 is actually quite significant when you have a hand with lots of blues.
Yeah, and with
Yeah, like
cards,
3 blues. It's a blue that does something.
yeah, and with cards like Massacre these days that can double intimidate, or in conjunction with things like Barraging Beatdown. Sometimes do you find that's just sort of the final intimidate you need to really push the hand through?
Yeah, let's say you have something like Barraging Beatdown the Arsenal and you draw a hand with a 6 power, Barraging Bighorn and a blue or something. I don't know. It can make the difference of that extra intimidate that you need to push through damage. But yeah, like 95% of the time I just block with it or pitch it.
Fair enough. A couple of blue cards I wanted to ask you about, in particular, because I can see you run 2 Reckless Swing. We'll get back to that, but in particular, I can see you've got 2 Sand Sketch planned. Sorry, Sand Sketched plan. Bit of a tongue twister there. Because I've noticed a number of other brute lists running 3 of that these days, with the increased number of 6 power cards in the deck.
Yeah.
I've played against it a few times. It seems pretty strong. They Sand Sketch plan, fetch up a Beast Within. They get the guaranteed Intimidate, 2 action points. So what's sort of your thought process behind only running 2 of those?
I was running 3 initially, and I had a couple of turns where I would just get multiples of it and another blue card, and then I just couldn't use them. I found that's why Awakening Bellow actually, does something in that situation. To be honest with you, in terms of the blues for Brute, it's really up to your preference. Cards like Blue Breakneck Battery, I've used with Blood Rush Bellow, and it actually works really well. Cards like Primeval Bellow in blue can be real decent as well. A blue Pack Hunt just to get an extra attack that intimidates without having to discard. That slot is all up to preference. Now, another reason why I was running Awakening Bellows and not more Swing Fists is because I did want to have a few more non-attack actions just to protect myself against maybe like a Heron's Flight
Yep.
or some of those cards that
Crane Darts,
it
things like
actually
that.
matters whether it's a attack or non-attack.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so, would your thought process be when you're looking at blues for Brute, things like I feel like Wrecker Romp and Barraging Beatdown, some Reckless Swing, some sand sketched. Are those sort of the core blues? And then, like you were saying, you would probably use that as your baseline, and then just fill it out as you see fit, depending on your playstyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Another worthy blue mention would be Savage Feast. Um, Sometimes you can do like a Blood Rush Bellow turn with multiple action points and Savage Feast. It becomes an attack for 6 that cantrips and doesn't intimidate as well, which is pretty decent. But yeah, that one is pretty open. I feel like the different actual abilities on the cards are less important because I think 90 to 95% of the time you're either pitching or blocking with them.
Okay, well, that's interesting stuff. Before we move on to sort of some more uh, detailed questions about matchups or certain cards or strategy,
Mm-hmm.
the final card choice I wanted to ask you about was Tome of Findale. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a card again that I've seen a lot of brute lists run three of, because rather than being inhibited by having to have a time stat potion out, I feel the thought process for brute players is you get that down in Arsenal, you roll the scabskin leathers, hope to hit a four, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
golden. So, what made you decide to run sort of two of those instead of the three that I've seen in a lot of lists?
Um, so basically, the way I looked at it is the number of setup cards. Setup cards are cards that I consider that you put into the arsenal to set up into a big turn. I mean, the main one for Brute is Blood Rush Bellow. That card is insane in the arsenal. You can go off into a massive turn. So is the Tome, and I'm just quite comfortable with having 5 copies of that. If I do run Remembrance, if I have a control matchup, it's mainly because I don't actually think of a matchup that I do run 3 of. It's probably because I only run one time snap, so the way I figured it out is, I would either roll Scapskin with that gloves as backup for action points or use a time snap for those. And to be honest, I don't see myself using that card more than twice in a game. Um,
I
I
did.
tend to be I tend to pitch it a lot. I prioritize not blocking with it, saving it for late game. But to be honest with you, I think it's absolutely fine to run 3, and it could actually be the correct list.
Yeah, because I suppose lists that are running triple sand sketched as well, that's like an additional little combo there that they can, sand sketched up, search something up, get 2 action points, and then go off with the tome from there. Um,
Absolutely, that's a really good one. And just a sand sketched tome is just so clunky in multiples. If you draw in multiple tomes, um, you start being forced to block with one, and then it blocks for 2, and I rather just run 2.
yeah, no, fair enough. Now, just going into some more general questions about your your gameplay or strategy on brutes, because I know there's definitely still this, I feel, opinion about brute that it's all about, getting these big intimidate turns and just going super aggro and winning with those. But I know just from watching a lot of matchups and playing a lot of games against you, I tend to see you, there's a fair few turns where you're blocking with 2 or 3 cards and go and pitch, swing with the club, go. Um, do you,
Yeah, I think Hayden asked me that question, being like, how do I actually end up winning my games? A lot of the time, so basically the way I see it is, as a brute player, you have to know when you're supposed to be, the aggressor, or where you're supposed to just defend. Um, Against a lot of aggro decks, like aggro ninja, aggro warrior, what else is there? Ranger. A lot of these kind of very aggressively orientated decks, I tend to play very defensively, and I do tend to go for the more fatigue type strategy, where I'm happy to just block with my whole hand if it saves me that life, and it blows their tunic or blows their arsenal. I'm happy to block with 2, 3, 4 cards every turn. It's fine. And because Romping Club hits do stack up,
yeah,
and people are so willing just to take 4 damage with no on-hit effect, they're like, okay, I'll just take that and swing back. But, if I'm dealing 4 damage a turn and maybe stripping 1 card away from your hand and dealing 1 damage, and you're coming back at me with 3 cards and I block all of it and then come back with a club again, times that by 10, 15 turns, eventually I'm ahead 15 life.
yeah, and
Um,
it starts to get quite frustrating for your opponent as well. Like they can sort of start feeling I'm not getting anywhere, and perhaps making aggressive plays that aren't the best.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because
And I think it could be a good time to talk more about the matchups, but yeah.
Yeah, because you mentioned sort of aggro, like say warrior and ninja. I know we've spoken a bit about it before, but I know one of your sort of bread and butter plays you like doing against those decks is the single barraging beatdown into weapon swing.
Yeah.
So that one, because I know some players, like including myself, when I've tried to play brute, there's this temptation to just save those barragings for as long as possible to get like the guaranteed intimidate 3 or 4 cards.
Yeah, and I think it stems back from the OTK Brute list that was in Welcome to Wraith, which is a great control deck, but the card barraging beatdown is so much more than obviously it's great when you intimidate all 4 cards out of their hand, so it gets through a ton of damage, but against aggro, you don't have time to do this. And to be honest, doing a single barraging beatdown and attacking with the club, stripping an aggressive player's 2 cards is massive. Especially, we're talking ninja, we're talking redline warrior. Their turns with 2 or 3 card hands are infinitely worse than their 5 card hands. So I just like forcing that situation where my opponent, intimidates 1 card. That already makes their blocks a little bit clunkier because it strips them of that decision making. And then they're forced to use 2 cards from their hand, which most likely are threats, because they tend to block with red cards to save a blue so they can pitch and do something. So you're basically, if you're constantly doing single barraging beatdowns, you're just stripping your opponent of threats. So if it goes to late game, where you go through your deck once, and so does your opponent, they're just going to be left with blues.
Yeah,
And
because
that's when you can start going very aggressively because you know that their 4 card, 5 card turns won't be as great.
yeah, because I know in decks like Ninja, which I've played a bit of, and I've seen you play against them. If you see someone blocking with like red gust waves or league taps, surging strikes, that just feels like such a big win for you that you're getting rid of those cards. Even if you're not getting through the damage, if you're getting a weapon swing in, you're trading a barraging beatdown for 2 threats. That really starts to stack up
Yeah.
over a game.
And I do want to talk about the ninja matchup a little bit because a lot of brute players are asking me how do I beat a ninja as a brute player? It just seems so hard. But yeah, single barraging. If they end up taking 8 damage or 7 damage, whatever your barraging was, and they have a 5 card hand, just use your whole hand to block. They just took 8 damage if you just, it's fine even to let a surging strike through. Let them get their combo and then just block the whole combo. Um, that's where I really like somersaults in that matchup because even if it's in your hand, it stops things like ancestral. Um, it stops lunging press, out of war plays sometimes. So I like the versatility of springboard somersault in that matchup. But yeah, the goal is just defense. Plus, you're a brute. You've got so much armor. If your opponent has a massive turn, goes Kodachi Kodachi, it's fine just to use a piece of armor to stop their Kodachi. Usually it just stops their mask triggers and makes their turn a lot less dangerous.
Yeah, and that's a big that like you say, the springboard somersault shutting down like a lot of those attack reactions, shutting down mass triggers. And the thing is, would you agree as well that if you're getting through damage, sure they might have 1 or 2 turns that get through per game, but as long as you can kind of shut down those Magenshi turns that shuffle their threats back in, you're kind of
Yeah.
feeling pretty good.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that actually make it quite tricky for the ninja player. Um, ninja, an aggressive ninja is very reliant on having all cards in their hand to have like a massive blowout turn. Um, so most of the time they will be taking these barraging beatdown turns. I think it's actually correct to block them and then try and have a decent 3 card turn. I was actually shout out to Aaron Newson who I've played in one of the qualifying events for the Rhodes who was playing more of a mid-range ninja, and I actually struggled against that a lot more than your aggressive ninja, just because each turn he was able to block my barraging with two cards and then Kodachi and put out a threat,
Yeah.
um, which in the long run, he was blocking all my damage, and I was taking these chip. He was chipping away with Kodachis, and that is actually the card that I'm most worried about as a brute player versus ninja. I don't care about surging line combos. I don't care about the leg tab combos. As the Kodachi, that's the scariest card.
Yeah, because if you can Kadachi twice a turn, every single turn,
Mm-hmm.
like you say, if the ninja player's able to block you out and you're sort of leaking 1 to 2 damage a turn, it then begins to open up a window for them to then take that damage and set up on their huge turn to get through, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of often what you would be trying to do as well, if I'm correct. You play the defensive role for a long time. Once you
Mm-hmm.
build up sort of a bit of a lead, if they that sort of allows you to then take a big hit from the ninja player if you want to go through and intimidate their full hand to win the game.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, yeah. Another thing is like I don't go on the aggressive until my opponent is quite low. So throughout my gameplay, I guess in general sense, it doesn't matter on the matchup. I want to have about a 10-15 life lead. Um, and then once I'm on like 17 and my opponent is on maybe 5, 6, 8, something like that, that's when I would start trying to combo off for a big intimidate play. Um, yeah, trying to count basically the armor, the defense reacts in Arsenal potentially. And once I get pushed through and get them in that kind of reckless swing spot, that's when I'm happy to start playing a lot more aggressively. And yeah, before Crucible, I wouldn't roll Scabskin ever against Warrior or Ninja because it's just too risky. But now you can afford to, but still not till that mid-late game stage.
Yeah, because that's one thing I see some brute players do. They kind of live and die by the scav skins, and sometimes it can work. But in observing some of your games, I can see games where you go through nearly the entire game without rolling it, or you might roll once
Mm-hmm.
or twice a game. Because would you say that's a mistake players make sometimes, is trying to get like a little bit greedy when you should just be treating it as basically a vanilla block for 2, vanilla block for 1, except for like
Mm-hmm.
critical turns where it's just hugely beneficial if you have 2 actions.
Yeah, I feel like do it if you have something like a Tome in Arsenal or maybe Blood Rush Bellow in Arsenal. If you're going to have a really big turn, you have to basically weigh up the kind of if you just took 7-8 damage and you whiff and you're going to have another massive 4 or 5 card hand coming at you, then it's not worth it. I do tend to roll Scabskin a lot more versus more control matchups where rolling a 1 isn't as punishing. If my opponent is like stuck there with 3-4 defense reacts in hand and Arsenal, and I roll a 1, I don't care because their turn 1 be as great anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the more aggressive your opponent is, the less you should roll Scabskin, basically.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Before we kind of move on to, again, some more general gameplay and perhaps other matchups, I wanted to ask you about the Warrior matchup, because I feel like that one's going to be a big matchup coming up for Nationals.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have sort of any tips and tricks for aspiring brute players out there? Because from what I've seen,
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very close.
Yeah, I would put the matchup on 50-50 now. I think Brick was ahead before Crucible, and Warrior just got so many new toys that it just made the deck way more consistent. And there's just a lot more different kinds of threats that they might have in the list. I like to play defensively and basically chip away with the club. Basically, I'm setting up my late game by pitching exactly the cards. I can block with whatever 3 cards I want. I take, actually, Yeah, sometimes I play one Reckless Swing, sometimes I play both, just because um, having two Reckless Swings in your hand can be just really bad. But basically, I want to get rid of all the cards that don't block, or block, not very well.
Yep.
I mean, I still keep one or two. Sometimes I play one tome, sometimes I play two. But the idea is that I just block really well. The whole game against Ninja and Warrior, I mean, the whole power of those two decks is their on-hit effects. So against both Ninja and Warrior, you just have to know exactly when to block what. I love to sit on a defense react in my arsenal. I run three sinks, three somersaults. I did run one unmovable in my list, but I would probably cut that. Um, but yeah, basically, if you have one of those in your arsenal, you should feel very, very safe, and only use it when you really need to.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're hitting you for three with a weapon, you're hitting them for four with a weapon. Over the course of 20, 25 turns, you will be ahead on life.
Yeah, you can say.
And same idea with Ninja. Like a single barraging beatdown is going to strip them of two threats. So when you're swinging with a club with a barraging beatdown, chances are that they will block it, and they're going to block it with two cards. So using one card, the barraging, to get rid of two cards. It's the same thing with Warrior and the Valor. When they hit you for six or five with Go Again, and you block with two cards, it's just kind of, I don't know, it's just a really tough matchup because the onus is on you to not mess up your blocks.
Yeah, yeah, because it seems like a lot of turns, if their decision is whether to block the vanilla 4 damage a lot of the time, whereas your one, they attack them with something like a Spoils of War, for example, and you're thinking you don't want to necessarily block with 3 cards to get around the react because they might have Command and Conquer, but if you block with 2 cards and get blown out by an attack reaction, there's a lot of sort of small decisions throughout the course of the game against Warrior. It feels that if you get
Absolutely.
one wrong, they can get you.
And for me, the most dangerous card on the Warriors side is Ironsong Determination. That card, especially very late game, can be very punishing if you don't have that defense react in Arsenal. So it's a really good idea to keep track of that card in your opponent's graveyard. What else? I just feel like it's a very grindy matchup. I tried previously to go aggressively against Warrior, but you just get punished. Those Dawnblade counters start stacking up and you get blown out. So I play a very, very defensive, slow game versus Warrior.
Yep. So if I can just summarize quickly, the more aggressive matchups as Brute, you want to play it sort of slow and steady, grind them out, wait for your spot, which might come towards the late game. You get them down to say sort of 7 to 10 life. If you can guarantee get off a big Intimidate hit to try and get them into that Reckless Swing range, that's what you want to go for. But you kind of don't want to fall into the trap of going extremely aggressive, trying to race them, and then finding yourself heavily on the back
Falling
foot.
behind, yeah. But also what could happen is your opponent when they start going defensively and they start, saving sink below an arsenal, once you can place them on a defense reaction in arsenal, then I think you can just start going more aggressively, because it's this weird situation where it's not just matchup dependent whether you go aggressive or defensive. You have to adjust to your opponent's play style. If they start slowing down, start dropping potions, and just chilling, maybe going for a weapon swing, you can start trying to do more aggressive plays.
Yeah, because
I mean, the great thing about Brute is the versatility of the deck. You can do amazing things on the offense. You can do amazing things on the defense. It's just, yeah, I feel like it's just very versatile.
Yeah, because if you put them on a card like Sink Below or Springboard, for example, rather than going for those Intimidate turns, you might just throw out like a Pack Hunt or barraging Bighorn, something that they don't necessarily want to use the defense react on because they want to save it for an
Mm-hmm.
intimidate turn, and then you're kind of trapping them into playing with 3 or 4 card hands with no arsenal for 2 or 3 turns, and that starts to stack up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something Brute. The good thing about Brute is you can have a really good turn with 4 cards in hand, 3 cards in hand, 2 cards in hand, 1 card in hand. I think that's why I like the class so much, is it's just so versatile. A lot of the time Ninja with 2 cards in hand can barely do anything. You just like swing with Kodachi twice in Arsenal. Um, whereas all you need is a yellow pitch and you're just swinging with club, forcing a block or getting through 4 damage. So yeah, it's important to know when to play aggressively and when to play defensively. And that there's a lot of factors that you have to look out for. I mean, in the Warrior matchup, once they start burning out of threats, that's when you can start going more aggressively. If they start playing defensively, once you start going aggressively and they're forced to block, that also gets rid of their threats. So it's all just about kind of grinding away that advantage, whether it's through club swings. Because that's the thing about a pitch and a club swing. You're not using any cards and you're dealing 4 damage.
It's one of the most efficient attacks in the game.
Yeah, and if you're doing that turn over and over and over again, and they're blocking with a card and taking 1 damage, that's an advantage from life total perspective and like deck total perspective. So yeah, I do tend to, for example, a matchup like Dash, with Arc Smash now, I do tend to go for the fatigue option. Try and basically grind away with single barragings, weapon swings, block everything I can. I would probably take pistols hits because it's just inefficient to block those. But I tend to basically try and block up as much damage, wait for that arc smash their chambers, and then they're forced to boost. And as soon as if they keep on boosting, eventually you'll just grind them out.
Yeah, so you really want to minimize the damage on their sort of big high octane turns or big boost turns. You're kind of happy blocking with 4 cards, leaking a bit of damage, and kind of like waiting until you can ideally smash out 1 or 2 chambers, and then you're pretty confident you can just play the fatigue game from there and keep blocking and blocking.
Yeah, and it's cool seeing Dash is trying to play around it. I've seen Dash players play Remembrance and get back the chambers and replay them. If they start doing that, you just start going aggro. I mean, if they're going to be drawing their chambers and, you start intimidating them, and if they're left with... It's just so easy to get damage through. And, if they're like swinging with a pistol and then dropping a chamber, and that's their turn, that's fine. Then you can just take it and just start going very aggressively.
Yeah, because the Dash matchup's a really interesting one. I know there's a bit of a debate about Arc Smash being good or not. Personally, I love it. I think it's pretty good. So yeah, and I suppose Control Dash, I feel you've got a very good matchup because they don't have really the option to boost through you. So if you can smash out enough chambers, even with Remembrance, like you're saying, they can get a few pistol hits. If they play the chamber, it's kind of time walking themselves a bit of the time.
Yeah, in saying that, I did cross out the Dash control deck a bit too hastily, I think. I think it's still a solid deck. I feel like it's not as impactful as it was before Crucible. But I think it's still a solid choice, and if you navigate that list correctly, you can do really well.
Yeah, I just wanted to go quick fire through a few classes just very quickly because I feel they won't be as represented at Nationals. But so we can just spend a minute or two quickly on each of these. I feel Ranger, is that sort of similar to Warrior and Ninja? You just sort of play the grind out game.
Yeah, if they go aggressively, I mean, barraging is extra powerful because they don't have a weapon. So, I mean, if you're barraging, they block with 2 cards. If you're romping club for 4 and they block, eventually they're going to run out of cards. And you just used... I mean, Brute is one of those bulky classes that every card that blocks for 3. So that's a massive advantage because you just use your cards to block. You don't care. Just block everything you can. Swing with the club, basically.
Yeah, things like Remorseless and Red Ledger, you don't really need a whole lot of actions, I guess. So
Yeah, I really like that Ranger does have access to all these, Sleep Darts, Remorseless, Red Ledger. Those are all great cards that shut down a lot of decks, but they punish. It's quite easy for Brute to play around them, Sleep Dart, just swing them with the club. Remorseless, swing them with the club. You see where I'm going with that.
party with the club,
Yeah.
Right, moving
Oh
on.
yeah, Red in the Ledger, you just drop an Alpha Rampage.
Just moving on to Runeblade quickly, because I think there might be a few Runeblade decks. We haven't seen a lot of it. There might be some teams or players kind of testing under the radar. I know when I used to test against you on Runeblade, I feel it's a strategy just block as many rune chants as you can because they're using cards to generate rune
Yeah,
chants.
I do tend to basically side in all my blues, all my yellows, and really cut down on the reds, just to make sure to have pitch. You just want to block all the rune chants. Sometimes I even get pinged for one rune chant, and I just pitch a red and block it, because if I'm creating that situation where we go to super late, I'm going to end up drawing that red. You just used all your red cards and going to start drawing blue and then eventually fatigue anyway.
Yeah, because that's what I found when we played. Even if you can build up a bit of an early lead on Runeblade, if you're if they've used 3 cards to generate 7 rune chants and you pitch 2 to block 6 of those, then yeah, that stacks up over time. So
yeah, you're using a lot of cards to build up your rune chants and your advantage. And if I keep on barraging and stripping 2 a turn, then eventually that stacks up.
yeah, so we can move on from that. I suppose the advice is block the rune chants. Don't be afraid to take a little bit of damage and play the long game. Now the other class that we might see a few of, but we haven't seen a whole lot of it, is Wizard, which is sort of an incredibly good matchup for Brute, to the best of my knowledge. You've got Skullhorn for the Arcane Barrier 2, you've got Null Rune Gloves. You can pitch to prevent tons of their damage, and then the Intimidate mechanic really kind of shuts down, or really takes away their choices in a way.
Yeah, and versing Wizard and versing Control in general, I have quite a similar plan. That's when I bring in those energy potions and I try and go for more of a setup play. I still tend to just try and get rid of their hand with barraging beatdowns and all that, but I'm actively pushing through damage. Against Wizard and against most control decks, I just want to do a big setup turn. I don't know, double Blood Rush bellow them with a time snap into Scap Skin Leathers for ridiculous turns. Because if you build up that advantage, then going for a big Intimidate play, especially versus Control, doesn't punish you as much. So yeah, whether it's Ninja Control, whether it's Wizard, whether it's OTK, Runeblade, I think I just like going for big setup plays.
All decks I've lost to you playing, so I know that feeling well. Yeah, and the thing is, against Wizard, you can sort of be pretty fearless in throwing out all your cards because, if you intimidate their cards, you draw up your hand before those intimidate cards come back. So it's not like they're going to sort of catch you out. If they do try catch you out, they're putting kind of their life on the line there. So yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, in saying that, I think the toughest matchup for Brute, I think every one of those matchups, Ninja can be really hard, especially if they know what they're doing with Kodachis. Warrior can be extremely hard if they're real tricky with their threats. But I think Guardian seems to be the deck I struggled the most with. I think Guardian has a slight edge, just because they use 2 cards and swing for 6, and the fatigue game doesn't work as well against them. Your club swings for 4, their hammer swings for 6. and also, a lot of your advantage comes from those scab skin rolls into tomes, basically trying to get a really big play out, while at the same time trying to protect yourself from crippling crushes with Dominate, from Mangles with Dominate, CNCs with Pummels and all that. So it's a very fine line of trying to keep pressure on, maintaining your threads and, saving for late game, trying to set up tone plays, trying to set up defense react and arsenal. So to be honest, it's a matchup I struggle the most with.
Yeah, because it seems like one of those classes as well that, yeah, like you say, it's tough to play the fatigue game against them because their weapon hits for 2 more damage, and
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of, if you go aggressive against them, Guardian's a deck that can, it's hard to sort of thread the needle because if you intimidate a bunch of their cards, they're going to be coming back at you with like a huge dominated crippling crush. Or
Exactly. They can. It's not like a control deck that is, I don't know, has a really average turn. They can. I mean, that's the one kind of drawback from Brute that I see, right? Like, none of your hits have an on-hit effect. Whereas, all your classic Welcome to Wraith, you have Ninja Warrior, Guardian, they all have powerful on-hit effects. Um, so, yeah, you're doing pure damage, and they're swinging back at you with an on-hit effect. So, um, if you keep on doing that, you'll eventually lose because of that advantage. So,
yeah, because they can run you out of your defense reacts effectively, and then start remembrance their big attacks back in, and it becomes sort of difficult to keep up late game.
yeah, so I think it's still can be an okay matchup, just because when you're barraging them, a lot of the time they have to block with their threats because they're so reliant on their blue pitch cards. If you intimidated a blue card and they're stuck with two reds and a blue, um, I don't know,
Yeah.
they're bound to block with one of those reds. So it's just this kind of, yeah, basically a barraging beatdown. You have to make sure that you keep on hitting those reds. You have to put enough pressure to stop them from doing like a big pummel play. So it's a really kind of tough balancing act versus Guardian.
So it's a matchup you need to know really well because I think it's one
Yeah.
of those matchups as well. It's not like you make a big mistake and loses the game. It's kind of you realize, 14 turns into the game that suddenly you're running low on threats and
Mm-hmm.
you're not getting through the damage that you want to, and by the time you realize that it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so Guardian, quite a tough one.
Yeah, and in general, I think it's going to be a deck that I don't know why people aren't hyping up Guardian. You see all this brute hype, probably because of Arc Smash, but I think Guardian is a deck that we should be hyping as well.
Yeah, it still seems seems incredibly strong. Got a lot stronger with Crucible. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we've covered a lot of the matchups. I thought maybe we could just sort of talk briefly about Nationals, sort of strategies, deck choice, that sort of thing. Because
Mm-hmm.
one thing I kind of noted is that you and Tom sort of stuck with your main decks. I know you played Guardian originally, but you were pretty keen on Brute from Arcane Rising onwards.
Mm-hmm.
Tom's been a Dorinthia player through and through, day one. Um, and we sort of saw that pay off because you both know the decks really well, you know the matchups really well, and we saw you both end up in the final. And I believe Matt
Mm-hmm.
was saying that over the course of the qualifiers and the top eight, there were about 40 unique players. So it's definitely one of the bigger road to Nats, considering it
Mm-hmm.
from that perspective. And I can't help but compare it to my own experience of bouncing around a few decks here and there, trying Moonblade, trying Wizard, bit of Ninja Control, and
Mm-hmm.
just sort of going on to like the new sort of bright new thing. But even if the deck is strong, you kind of aren't as good as playing it as you want to be. So,
Yeah,
and
I think just a crucial thing about it that I just want to mention is, Crucible dropped very recently. Um, I just feel comfortable in the deck. To be honest, I haven't had much time to play. To be honest, I've probably played, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 games after Crucible dropped. Um, So I think a lot of players just don't have time to get comfortable with some of those other classes, just because of the time frames. Um, but yeah, it's also because I mean you can get comfortable with the class, a new class. Let's say you decide to go with wizard, um, but then you have to nail down every single matchup and know exactly what you're doing for every single one, and how to optimize the lists according to every matchup. And I think it's, a lot of people are kind of crossing off some of the classes that we've talked about. People are saying that Ninja's terrible now, and they're saying that Wizard is still average, and so is Ranger. But I feel like, and people are, there's kind of this um, tendency to just basically say, Warrior beats Ninja, Wizard beats Warrior. There's a lot of these kind of like knowns that I feel
known.
like, yeah, it is known, that I think are not necessarily true. I feel like people are, there's a lot of, now with Crucible, there's just so many ways to play all these different classes.
Yeah, and
Like, I would, like, what about Control Warrior, Just play 9 shunts and just sit there all game. I don't know, that just seems, I'm not big of a Warrior player, but I don't know why people don't try these, different strategies. I mean, Jason Long did the Control Ninja, which was great to see. But I think Ninja has a lot of more potential, like, for a person who likes to block with 3 defense cards.
yeah.
I'm actually, eyeing up Ninja as the new class that I want to try out because it just looks so good. I mean, your stuff blocks for 3. That's, I don't know, for me that's the Warrior matchup solved,
I reckon you got to stay away from Ninja, because if you're better than me in Ninja, what am I here for? For comedic entertainment. No, but like that's one thing. That's one thing that I was kind of thinking as well. That in regards to deck choice, I think like that's kind of a lesson I learnt the hard way. You can kind of get caught up thinking, what are the, quote marks best decks in the meta right now, and oh well, I'm going to play this deck because it beats those. But then you're kind of working in this theoretical realm where you're thinking, okay, everyone has perfect information, everyone's going to sort of migrate to the best decks. And then you turn up with a deck and you play against one of your bad matchups and get crushed. That happened to me. I turned up with Ninja Control 2 days in a row. I was thinking there's not going to be much dash control rounds, dash mid range. I feel I'm kind of comfortable with it. Round 1, shout out Keegan, just crushed me on dash. Got the chambers out, got the purifiers. I'm there chipping with Kadachis for twice a turn. He's hitting me for 4 damage 4 times a turn. So I think there's something to be said about playing a class that you're very comfortable with, really well. And if you're worried about a few matchups, just test those matchups extensively. And, maybe you need to adjust your playstyle. Maybe there's a few cards that can help you out here or there. But I do think, because where this is coming from is because I know a lot of people have spoken to you about potentially switching to Brutes or, jumping onto a class.
Yeah, there's just a lot of interest in the deck, and I think it's just because in Arcane Rising, Dash was such a dominant deck, and now people are like, oh, Smash solves that matchup. I actually still don't feel too comfortable in that matchup. Someone asked me before whether I wanted to verse Tom in the finals or Henry, who was playing Dash, and I didn't have an answer, just because, I don't know, it just feels that a lot of these matchups can swing either way quite easily.
Yeah, because, one thing as well is saying Karol's still too humble, so he won't say it, but he's an extremely experienced Brute player. He hasn't had much time to play recently, but he's put in a lot of games over sort of his Flesh and Blood lifetime on that. And I think sometimes when I've done this as well, when you see someone, a really good player, play a deck really well, they make it look easy, but it's actually a fair bit harder than it is. I've tried Brute myself a couple of times. Even playing against Dash, like you say, I've played against good Dash players, and even with good rolls, I found that to be it can be a very tough matchup. I mean, you see a brute player sort of crush these aggro ninja decks and beat warrior and beat dash, and you're thinking like, that's it, they've solved the meta. I mean, yes, maybe the deck is quite good if you know exactly what you're doing, but you just need to be very confident that you know the matchups well. Like the deck, it's like similar to Dash midrange in a way in the old meta. It was a very strong deck. Maybe to a certain extent you could say it plays itself, but when if you're playing what's supposed to be a good matchup for you, and you're playing brute versus ninja aggro, the ninja aggro player has played sort of 500 ninja games. I mean, I would put my money on them to win rather than someone playing sort of brute for their fourth or fifth game, and that's
Absolutely.
and that's not coming from an elitist angle saying like people aren't good enough to play these decks, because you know I put myself pretty squarely in that camp as well. Decks like Wizard, I just like, well, I'm not good enough to learn it in time. So in saying that, I mean, if you feel strongly that one of these new decks out there is going to be just strictly better than your first choice for nationals or something like that, then by all means, you know, give it a go. Do your best to test for it. But I suppose my caution is don't sort of just rely on the raw power of the deck to carry you through.
To carry you through, yeah.
Experience plays like
It's true. I mean,
large part in that.
yeah, and saying that, I mean, constructed, you know, when you have 40 life each, and there's just so many opportunities to make a small mistake here and there. And I think regardless of the matchup, regardless of who's favored, obviously, you know, if you have a really good matchup and your deck is built to be very favored, then you know you can make a few more mistakes than your opponent. But regardless of that, I think eventually those mistakes will stack up, and even in a very favored matchup, you can lose.
Yeah, because that's the great thing about Flesh and Blood is like I'd say, you know, the better player wins far more often than, I mean, maybe it's controversial, but I would say far more often in games like Magic where, you know, you draw one land and it's an auto loss. It's very rare in Fab to draw repeatedly bad hands over and over again, which leads to a loss. So
yeah, and just, you know, every turn in Flesh and Blood, there's just so many options that it really does test your skill level. You know, constantly. You're basically every turn you're tested. Like, are you going to block correctly? Are you going to do the optimal attack? Like, are you going to pitch the right card to save for late game? Every turn, you know, even from the start. That's sometimes I even in the finals, I found myself overthinking everything. I was like, am I pitching the correct card? You know, like, am I supposed to pitch the other one and arsenal the other one? And on turn one, I kind of started shaking my head because I pitched the springboard somersault and arsenal the sink below instead of pitching the sink below and arsenaling the other one. And I was like, no, this is going to punish me later on. But, you know, things like that do add up.
yeah, exactly. And there's the added dimension of at a tournament setting of you have to plan for time pressure, and if you're playing a new deck, then, you know, I found it hard on occasion. And the thing is, even like if you are playing quickly, you need to make sure that, you know, if you're playing a slow deck, that you can close the game out on time, or, you know, if you're prepared to play quickly, you have to understand that unlike sort of something like tabletop where you can, you know, have an hour and a half game and it's all good fun, in a tournament setting, you have to know that, like, well, I might have to make all of these decisions with like 20 seconds per turn. And like, you know,
I think it's really important to be able to go into a bit of an autopilot mode when you need to, where, you know, you basically, if you're versing a player who plays a little bit slow and you're going for a fatigue strategy, you have to be really aware of that. It happened to me a few times where basically what I need to do is take zero time when it's my priority. You know, pitch, swing of club, draw my cards, pass. Like, just basically play quick.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I feel that pretty much brings us to the end of our episode today. I suppose one final question that I was meaning to ask you earlier, but didn't quite get round to, was because of the sort of unique format for this Road to Nationals, where you didn't know for sure, but you had a pretty good idea of what decks were going to be in the top eight.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be playing sort of the exact top eight list you have written that people are seeing, or in sort of a much wider field with a more diverse metagame, would you be looking at that deck and making a few changes?
Yeah, I'd probably run Boneheads, which I didn't run in this one, because Boneheads are quite versatile against Ninja and Wizard. I wasn't putting anyone on playing Wizard, so I just took them out. I was confident enough with my list against Ninja that I didn't feel like I needed them. But yeah, I'm kind of waning away from unmovables as well. So that one red unmovable that I had, I'd probably just cut. It's controversial because, opens you up against Guardian quite a lot, but with a Sing, some armor, and a card in hand, it's fine to stop a crippling. But yeah, I think the main thing that kind of changed for me for Brute with Crucible is that I do want to play a lot more aggressively and find windows where I can deal a ton of damage without taking a lot in the previous turn. But yeah, I also wanted some people asked me about cards, like shout out to Jordan who asked me, there was all this hype for Coax the Commotion. Everyone was hyping that card up and people don't seem to be playing it. I think Tom's list does an amazing job of really showcasing the power of that. I think Coax replaces Flock very well in Warrior. That quicken token is what you need in Warrior.
Yeah,
because
I was pushing
chances are
to get the Coax in.
Yeah, exactly. Because, most of the time you're stripping the hand away from your opponent with things like Spoils of War anyway. And, if you hit them with a Coax, chances are they won't be able to do a Quicken token. Use the Quicken token. So I think that card is insane in Warrior. But also someone asked me about Chains of Eminence, which is one of those cards that as soon as it got spoiled for Arcane Rising, people were like, we're going to see 3 of in every deck and all that kind of stuff. I think it's an amazing card in Runeblade, just because of the non-attack action component, activates Nebula. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that card used on a very high level of play. Single chains, especially. I don't know, I've always wanted to build a list where you have Sync Blows, Enlighten Strikes, and, maybe even run 6 Syncs, and you basically use the Sync ability to put chains on the bottom of your library and play a very control deck. And then at the end of the game, you know exactly what your opponent is going to draw, because when you chains, they pitch their cards, and you can just name whatever and really shut down their turns.
Yeah, and shout out to Jack McGee for that question. Just had a quick look. He was asking about the Skullhorn and Chains of Eminence. Well,
Yeah.
and okay, I know you're a busy guy, so I'm guessing we might need to wrap it up there. Thanks for sharing all your insight on Brood. I'm sure a lot of people will be pretty happy about that. I suppose my final question for you, the most important one in the entire episode, is you're going to let me borrow your deck for Nationals, right? Like, that's all good. We got that locked in.
Yeah, it's all good.
After I preached that I'm not switching deck last minute, easy, smash the chambers, intimidate away, all good.
It's real easy. Now, I also wanted to address Benjamin Les almost dropped a question as well. Ben was like, are you going to go club or claws? I love both. It's just so hard to give up on the club because it's so good. It attacks for 4. But I have been playing around with a claws list that just goes ham. All you do is you just defend, drop a bunch of potions into play, like 2 energy potions, 2 time snaps, block everything, and then just set up a double or even triple Blood Rush Bellow turn.
Yeah, absolutely, and I suppose it takes up 2 slots in the sideboard, so it is a big trade-off there, having to use that.
Yeah, I was running claws actually before, but the 2 slots proved, too much to give up.
All right, then I suppose just before we go, give like sort of a final plug to the YouTube channel. We're sort of constantly putting up more gameplay videos there when we can. We've got sort of some more Runeblade ones coming.
Yeah, we're gonna post. Actually, we're gonna post it right now. The Runeblade vs Warrior.
Oh, that was a thriller of a game. So
Yeah.
if I was watching that one. And just one final shout out, I can't believe I missed it, but to Jesse and Aaron from I Like Butter Media, who did the top 8 coverage. Amazing photos and play-by-play write-ups as usual. I know they've done it before a couple of times, so big shout out to you guys. Awesome job.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Kieran.
You're the star of the show, mate. What would I do without you? Well, anyway, and all the best to you and Chi-Chi, and exciting times. I'll try to do you proud, Nats.
Yeah, and good luck to everyone going to nationals.
All right, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.